The last panel, speaking of raffling things off, ladies and gentlemen, we have $673 billion to 600, what's a few billion between friends? 670 some odd billion dollars to raffle off now. But it's not an unbiased raffle. It goes to people who meet certain criteria. Let's see here. We're going to discuss what those criteria are and what the purposes for this are. So why don't we all come up on stage? We have Tom Cohen from Fiber to the Home Council, Jim Baller of the Baller-Herbst Law Group. We have Harold Feld, who has just joined Public Knowledge. Congratulations, Harold. What a great job. And what a great person for it. Joanne Hovis with Columbia Telecommunications Group. And Sharon Gillette, who is the Telecom and Cable Commissioner for the state of Massachusetts and a former colleague and collaborator. And we're going to start. If you want to come up, that's fine. If you want to speak right there, that's fine. What's your pleasure?
It's working. Okay, I think I'll just stay here if that's okay.
Okay, then everybody gets 15 minutes, and I'll be the time Nazi.
Okay, great. David asked me to talk about a few things today, and I thought they would all tie together if I told you how I came to be the Commissioner of Telecommunications for Massachusetts. I had spent many years at MIT where I was researching broadband policy and economics, and just around the time of the meltdown in 2001, I got very interested, Esme in the audience, I got very interested in municipal broadband and did a lot of research looking at that, and then later turned over to look at the economic impact of broadband and worked with several colleagues, Bill Lair at MIT, Carlos Osorio, who was our doctoral student at the time and now teaches in Chile, and then Marvin Serbu, who teaches at Carnegie Mellon University. And the four of us did a study for the Department of Commerce looking at the economic impact of broadband. And to be honest, when we started the study, we really didn't expect with 4 years of data that we were going to see much in statistics, but we thought we would try. And we did. Amazingly enough, we did see actually a pretty significant impact of broadband on job creation and on indicators like home values and things of that nature. That was, I have to say, surprising to us. But anyway, the study was out there, and a few years later, I got a phone call asking me, explaining to me that the governor of Massachusetts had decided to split the Massachusetts Public Utilities Commission into two pieces, one which would exclusively focus on energy and one which would exclusively focus on telecom, and would I come and talk to them about the telecom slot? And I was a little surprised, to say the least, but I went in to talk to the folks, and I went in all prepared with my spiel about how important broadband was to the economy, because the people interviewing me were from the Housing and Economic Development Secretariat. And within about 30 seconds, they said, this is Governor Deval Patrick, whose his administration was very new at that time. He had just taken office, made this split, and his staff said to me, I came in and started talking about how important broadband was to the economy and how it should be important to what they do. And within about 30 seconds, they had interrupted me and said, yeah, we know all that. We've seen all the stuff you've written already, and we know that. What we want to know is what you would do about it. Which, so at that point I said, I like these people, They get it. They understand how important broadband is to the economy, and they want to do something about it. So then the next question became, okay, short form is I got the job. And now I'm on the job, and now what should we do? So first of all, when you are figuring out what you should do, you have to figure out which problem you're trying to solve. I'm sure many of you have had occasion to be involved in projects where you discover halfway through that everybody's trying to solve a different problem. But in our particular case, the problem we were dealing with was, I'm sorry I don't have the map with me, but if someone wants to go online, I could show how to get to it. But there's what we had done was a map of Massachusetts, which looked community by community. So it being New England, it's a home rule state, and the way people think about where they live is not their county, but their town. And there are 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts, and of them we discovered that 32 had no consumer-grade broadband at all. So they had satellite service, dial-up service, but they didn't have cable, they didn't have DSL, and they certainly didn't have fiber to the home.
What's the URL, Sharon?
www.masstech.org/broadband. This was okay, and on the left there's a map, broadband map, about 2/3 of the way down. There you are. Map, broadband map. There you go.
Oop, PDF.
All right.
Okay.
So what this map showed us was that there were 32 communities who had nothing, and this was very consistent with what we were hearing from the communities, and certainly this was way high on the radar screen for the legislators from that district. This was there were two top complaints that they would receive about anything, constituent complaints to the legislative district from Western Mass, and number one was broadband, number two was rural transportation. So this was really, really important to them, and they really didn't see a way around it. So what we proposed was, that's it. You could probably zoom in a little so people could see. Thank you. Yeah. Do you want to update your Adobe?
No.
There we are. So the red communities are communities where there was no, this is as of June '07. I began in the spring of that year, and Governor Patrick took office in January of that year. So can you make the menu go away, David?
Oh,
thanks.
sorry.
Okay, no, that's all right.
Yeah.
The communities that are red there are the ones that had nothing. The orange ones are those that have partial coverage. So we've used the word underserved to mean that. We now wish we hadn't used that word because it has all sorts of other connotations, but we would say they're partially served communities. Typically, that's a community that has only DSL. And DSL reaches the center of town, but it doesn't reach all the way out into a large rural community. So what we ended up deciding to do, we proposed legislation. It was filed in October of 2007, and it was passed by the legislature at the end of July and signed by the governor on August 4th, '08. At lunch after the bill signing, I sat with one of the legislators from the district, and he informed me that 9 months was the absolute fastest he'd ever seen anything go through the legislature that went from concept to pass legislation in that time. By internet standards, it's a little slow, needless to say, but by legislative standards, it's very fast. And what the bill provided for was, first of all, most importantly, it provided money. It provided bonding authority, $40 million worth. For a new entity, which is essentially a broadband authority, which was created to invest using that money in broadband infrastructure and to partner with the private sector to bring service to the folks in these unserved and underserved areas. And it is not, the state is not intending to be a service provider here. They're not going to be sending bills to people. But the intent is to identify and partner with private firms that are willing to do that. There are many smaller firms. There are large incumbent firms. It's an open bidding process with an RFP to come to select partners. And it doesn't have to be one partner. It can be many partners. So the thought is the state is investing and actually, because it's bond funds, the state has to own those assets and then make them available on an equivalent basis to anybody who wants to co-invest with the state and do that and provide service. Now, I say co-invest, so it's a public-private partnership. It's a co-investment model. It's passed in August. In October, we went out with essentially an RFI. We were a little too clever by half. We called it a call for solutions, but basically it was an RFI. And 2 weeks later, what happened? Financial meltdown, right? So what happens to a co-investment model and financial meltdown? It gets a little challenging. Fortunately, as you all know, in the interim, in February, the federal government passed $7.2 billion worth of federal stimulus funds that can be used for broadband infrastructure that are accessible both to the public sector, so believe me, Massachusetts will be applying for some of those funds. But in addition, private firms, so for example, folks that would want to go in and to serve these regions would, we hope, be applying for the stimulus funds as well. Are others going to talk about the stimulus bill and what is in there, or do you want me to go there?
Your call, what do you think is important?
Okay.
Tell this group.
So the stimulus program, for those of you who haven't been awake till 3 in the morning for the last 3 months, I know there's several others on the panel who I've been corresponding with at 3 o'clock in the morning on this. But it provides $7.2 billion, but it is broken into two separate pots of money. 4.7 goes through the Department of Commerce, the NTIA, and 2.5 billion went through the Department of Agriculture through the Rural Utility Service broadband program. But the RUS people tell me that is actually they're going to use the funds to create a new program. It's not going to be the same old loan program, but they're still figuring out exactly how they're going to do that. In the meantime, NTIA was given 4.7 billion. It's a little bit carved up. 350 million was used to fund the mapping bill that went through last fall called the Broadband Data Improvement Act, or BDIA. 250 one is 250, one is 200. 200 is public computing. Okay. 200 is the public computing centers, and 250 million is for innovative programs that innovative and sustainable programs for broadband adoption. So demand side work, and exactly what sustainable means and what innovative means are things left to the NTIA to figure out. So those NTIA, and they also, and then the rest is, I believe, all for infrastructure programs. So it works out to about 3.9 billion for infrastructure with some other pots of money for other things. And importantly, I think for the Obama administration, indicating where they're going with things, 10 million explicitly set aside for the Inspector General at the Department of Commerce to make sure the funds get spent without waste, fraud, and abuse.
So I've heard that in California, they're setting up a stimulus czar through whom all the stimulus money has to pass. And I know in Vermont, our friend Tom Edselen, who's spoken here numerous times, has been appointed
the stimulus czar. Yeah, we have one too. His name's Jeffrey Simon. Yes, we have a stimulus czar. Yes.
What does that guy do in Massachusetts?
I'm sure he doesn't sleep much, for one thing. I'm sure he does a lot. But when it comes, so the stimulus, the other thing to understand about it is there's at least two different types of stimulus funds. There's things that are just, formula grants. So, some of the education funds, some of the housing funds. If you have this many people in your state, you get this much money, and it gets handed to you, and you figure out the ways you're going to spend it. Broadband is not like that. Both of these programs, both the NTIA and the RUS programs, are competitive programs with grants, NOFAs, they're called, Notices of Funding Availability. It's basically a grant solicitation, and whoever applies for it they will have to apply, and they will have to be selected. And believe me, there's going to be way more applications than there is going to be money. So it's going to be quite a interesting process. So some of the open questions that are still out there is, how in the heck is NTIA, which is a very well-intentioned agency with no staff, just being booted up to do this, how in the world are they going to give away, by the way, the statute requires them to give away half of the money, to obligate half of the money by the end of September of this year. Any of you that ever worked in government, that's like warp speed ahead, That's unbelievably fast. And on top of that, Congress writes a statute with very broad terms, and then there's lots of rules, like how do you define unserved, underserved, sustainable, innovative, keep going. Right, so there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and NTIA has been convening public forums. They had a whole series of them, probably many of you watched the webcast, with people speaking about different issues, about, testifying on different aspects of how those definitions should be done. NTIA has said publicly that they expect they will have the NOFA, first of all, April 13th. That's the deadline. If any of you want to comment, you can comment to the NTIA. You can also comment to the FCC. Both of them have open proceedings on comments of how it's called the BTOP, the Broadband Technology Opportunities Program, what the rules should be. And they have a 15-page list of questions which you can answer, and I'm sure you can comment on anything else that they missed in their 15-page list of questions. But anyway, the deadline is April 13th, which is a week from Monday, I believe. So if any of you have comments to make, now would be the time. Then NTIA has committed that after that, sometime between April and June, they will issue what the rules are going to be and get the first funding solicitation up. So, and they have to have obligated at least half of the money by September 30th and the other half a year later. So it's all very, very challenging. One of the big hot debates out there is sort of what role should states be playing in this, because can they help the federal government, or will they just steal all the money? I have heard people, certainly, not steal it, but in other words, will states just apply for the money themselves, and then nobody else would get any? So, in mass, I would say we're trying to craft a balanced approach. We don't know, though, how much authority the state will have versus NTIA take directly. One thing that's very clear from the statute, and I think I'll wind up here. One thing that's very clear from the statute: NTIA retains all final decisions over how the funds are spent. So that's short form. I'm sure there'll be many more questions, but I'll leave it. There's a lot more that could be said, but I'm sure all of you have good things to say too. So,
hey, Tom, you've been watching this for Fiber to the Home Council. What's your current take on?
Time is going backwards.
That's how this whole process goes.
It's like an hourglass.
Yeah.
Thanks, David, and thanks for inviting me. I represent one of my clients is the Fiber to the Home Council, and on their behalf, last Thursday, we submitted not only comments but a complete set of rules for the RUS program, in a sense trying to do their work for them. Also on behalf of another client, XO Communications, about a week before then, we submitted a complete set of rules as well for the BTOP program. Again, this is all in the context of this is an incredibly daunting task. Sharon was talking about it a bit. These agencies have been asked to go from 0 to 100 in just a few seconds. This is a lot of money to give out in a very short time, and they are under tremendous pressure as they do it. The first oversight hearing, they haven't even gotten their rules out. They haven't even got the comments in. The first oversight hearing is this Thursday. So that shows you sort of the pressure they're under to do this. I think a lot of what you'll hear today from us is sort of like the blind men feeling the elephant. This program, I encourage you, first of all, to read the statute. It's specific. There are new directives. Sharon talked about the new directive to the Rural Utility Service. The BTOP program directive is a new directive. It's very important to look at the statute and see what it has to say. Because if you begin at the onset of the statute, this is the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Okay, at the very beginning of it, it says the purposes are create jobs, create economic output, create long-term infrastructure, and do it quickly. Okay, this is what's driving it. They want to get this money out in the world, okay, more than anything else. And the broadband programs that have been fashioned fit within those overall frameworks. So if you ever have doubts about what the particulars of the broadband provisions say, always go back up to this, this force that's driving the statute. And so they will want to get projects that get people to work. On the RUS side, that create rural economic development. Okay, same thing on the NTIA side. And so, again, I would encourage people as they think about these programs to keep that in mind. There are lots of critical issues in both programs that are being fleshed out. The comments will talk about a lot of them. The task of getting a NOFA out or rules out with it, any of you who have dealt with the FCC knows you're lucky if you see them in 3 to 6 months after comments come in. They're being asked to do it in a matter of 30, 45, 60 days. That's it. Because what's driving them is all of the money has to be awarded by September 30th, 2010. That means they have to get it done in a little over a year. Okay, and if you begin to think about the timeline, let's say they get rules out on June 1. They probably give you 60 days to put an application together. to get it in the door, which is incredibly fast. Then they have to review it. The first money, and again, Sharon talked about it, I don't know the first dollar goes out the door until the fall, just practically. And so, again, you have to think about these agencies trying to do this work. If anybody has ever followed the RUS, you know how long the process takes to make a loan or a grant. In fact, the amount of money, the $2.5 billion given to the RUS, is roughly 100 times their annual appropriation. Okay, it's a lot of money to get out the door. And so my sense is what projects they are going to be looking for are ones, again, that meet the purposes of the Act, that get people to work and create economic output, but also projects that, in a sense, are prepackaged. They want projects they know will work. That is, people who have done these things before, who have some experience, who are credible. Again, they're getting hauled up before Congress every 90 days. Okay? And so they'll want to make sure they're choosing people when they go up to Congress who are actually going to succeed in what they do so they can look good. And in fact, if you're thinking of an application, put yourself in their shoes in order to do it. A couple of other things. And again, Sharon started down this road. If you look at the Rural Utility Service Program, the main directive is quite specific and quite new. You want to give awards to areas that are at least 75% rural, which is, by the way, something new. Generally, everything in the rural utility service has gone to rural areas before. But now it's 75% rural with insufficient access to high-speed broadband. We have a new term now, not just broadband service, but high-speed broadband service. And again, the RUS is going to have to flesh out that term. We, from the Fiber to the Home Council, obviously think fiber to the home speeds meet that requirement of high speed. And moreover, fiber to the home projects are construction projects. If you look at the jobs generating ability of those projects, you're digging up areas. You are, putting in fiber and other type of plant. And so we think that fits within it. In contrast, the program at NTIA, the BTOP program, is much more expansive. It has 5 purposes, ranging from bringing access to unserved areas, which is, I know it when I see it, but now we're going to have to define it, to underserved areas, which by itself is a tremendous challenge. If you've ever looked at various definitions in legislation of underserved areas, they are all over the place, to projects for education, awareness, training, projects for public safety, projects to stimulate demand, and the legislation does not prioritize any of those purposes. Okay, so NTIA therefore has discretion, again, within the overall purposes of the Act to figure out how to give out that money. And that is just the beginning of the challenge they have in order to do this. So I'm going to yield back the rest of my time. And I'm not? You want to ask questions?
There actually, Brett Glass, who was a wireless ISP in Wyoming, in Laramie, asked the question, did your submission to RUS on behalf of Fiber to the Home Council, was it technology neutral? And let me also extend that to say, was your XO filing technology neutral?
Okay. The Fiber to the Home Council, obviously we are an advocate for fiber to the home. I don't want to say anything other than that in terms of how we did it. We, however, said nothing to the RUS about wireless with the intention that we were not going to speak on their behalf. Okay, in other words, if people want to go in and talk about wireless programs at RUS, please go ahead, but we didn't figure our skill set was there to put in the particulars on wireless. Let me just say also about the RUS program, there are priorities for current and past borrowers. As for the XO filing,
And that was with the Department of Commerce, NTIA.
yeah. By the way, all filings go into one website at NTIA, the BTOP website. They are all listed there. If you go there, you can see them all. Yeah. Okay, and they, unfortunately, unlike the FCC's system, they're not quite as easy to access. They're just sort of listed. So you can't, I don't believe yet, type in anything and find them. But you can do it there. As for what we did for XO, that is both, we split the world between fixed, and fixed being both wireline and sort of point-to-point wireless, and mobile. Okay, and included both there.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
I don't know.
Yes, it is. Jim, the other 110 billion?
Right. David said to me, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to discuss other pots, other opportunities created by the Stimulus Act as a whole, other than the section that is specifically or explicitly designated for broadband. And yes, okay, I've discussed it. And there are, but I'm not going to discuss it in detail. We've created on our website, www.ballard.com, a written analysis of other funding opportunities. So I'll outline them very briefly here. But I would like to just step back and talk a little bit holistically about this act, which I think is just a wonderful act on so many different levels. So let me just say there's $48.1 billion in transportation funds that could be used for various purposes, including broadband. There's $4.5 billion for smart grids, $19 billion in health information technology funds, $21 billion in school construction funds, $8 billion in public safety funds, $12 billion in public housing funds, $250 million in energy efficiency and housing retrofits. And on that website, you can find a couple of memos and a lot of other information. The two memos cover the $7.2 billion and then other programs. You should find them pretty easy to find. So let's step back from where we are and look at this act holistically. And why do I think it's such a great thing? Well, first of all, as some of you know, and I saw your eyes glaze over the last couple of years when I talked about the efforts we are making to try to light a fire under the country to develop a national broadband strategy, and with the help of David and Gary Bowles and several of our chair people here. Charles Benton's here. I saw Drew Clark earlier. We've actually been at that process trying to figure out what a national broadband strategy ought to look like. And we've struggled with some of the same uncertainties, but not from the standpoint of trying to get money out very quickly, from a longer perspective. Blair Levin, who was the Obama administration's point person in describing the stimulus legislation, said that that is intended to be a first step, the first inning in a 9-inning game. The amount of money available is available economy-wide. It is not the solution to any of the economy's problems, but it's a first step. And to that extent, given that overall purpose and the ones that we've heard so far, just think of what this act does and its long-term benefits, even though there isn't enough money to do all of these things. What it has done is to say, well, categorically, they have money specifically for Internet access, explicitly for Internet access processes. They have money for community anchors, like community colleges and libraries and public safety and other community anchor institutions. They have money to try to increase deployment and availability and usage of internet. They support creative and innovative ways to do that. They emphasize economic development projects and jobs and upgrading healthcare. It's a wish list of all the things that we think that society, that America needs to do better. And it encourages people to think cooperatively. These are, you know, we have complained for years in the communications area about how the communications field is a series of silos with separate regulatory programs, with separate definitions, with separate constraints, with separate benefits. And here, what this bill does is it encourages the healthcare people to think about how to work with the public safety people and how to work together with the smart grids folks and think holistically about their communities and to talk to each other about how they can get bigger bangs for their bucks using infrastructure wisely, serving many different purposes. And in a way, the absence of clear definition at this point, I think, will ultimately have a tremendous positive impact on us, because the very fact that there are not currently specific definitions in some of these areas, I think is going to encourage a lot of creativity, a lot of cooperative discussion about these programs that will, I think, take us past that first inning, where you may or may not qualify for funding as defined ultimately by NTIA or RUS. I think that lots of communities are going to find areas of common interest, understanding of what broadband in its many forms can mean for their communities, and they're going to continue to push those projects forward in one way or another, with or without stimulus funding. Now, also, a part of this law is a provision that requires the Federal Communications Commission to develop a national broadband plan within 1 year from the enactment of the law, which works out to February 17th, 2010. And the FCC is now in the process of thinking through how to engage in that effort. So you have all of these forces acting, I believe, in a positive way. Everything is in play suddenly in a way that is happening years before it might otherwise have happened. The competitive process, I think, is encouraging people of all kinds to step forward and push ahead in figuring out what they would do if they had resources to do what they should be doing. And so let me just pass my time on. I realize that with this group, this is not the time to talk mechanics or details, but to talk about bigger picture of where we are and go from there.
I take it from that I should just leap in here. Okay, so my name is Harold Feld. I am legal director for Public Knowledge. I also write a blog about these things called Tales of the Sausage Factory, which tries to make what goes on in Washington in the broadband and media and telecom policy a little more accessible to folks.
And it's a primary source, folks, Tales of the Sausage Factory.
It's at wetmachine.com. I am also, in my copious spare time, doing some other consulting around the broadband stimulus with the Benton Foundation and working with them and a couple of others. But I'm here speaking with my legal director of public knowledge hat on. It's a new hat, so I really like showing it off. But I want to focus on, from a policy perspective, what does this stimulus package mean for our freedom to connect? And I think Jim hit a lot of the high points that I myself have also been very excited about since the stimulus package was first proposed and then became reality in this form. Number one, we have a huge shift in how people are thinking about the role of government and what that means. We have gone from the debate of does government have a role at all to what is the appropriate role for government to have. And while many other countries started with that debate, it has been a very long time for us to reach this point of recognizing that broadband infrastructure is a huge part of our future, our economic future, the future of civic engagement, and that therefore it is something in which government should have a role in nurturing, protecting, fostering, and encouraging. We have reaffirmed in this statute a number of our critical values that were, in fact, part of the original Communications Act, which was a very progressive piece of legislation, which set a number of very lofty goals for ourselves, and that we had been on the verge of abandoning. We have reaffirmed the importance of universal access, that we as a nation do not leave anyone behind in our nation when it comes to access to a critical resource like broadband. That this is a value to us that is worth spending billions of dollars on just for that alone. We have reaffirmed in here the value of community institutions. The Act explicitly focuses on libraries, public computing, innovative policies for bringing the benefits of broadband to people, not speaking just in economic terms, but in terms of the value and the way in which this improves people's lives and rooting those in the concept of community. That is huge as we turn away from what I believe was a misguided effort to structure our national policy and economy along notions of selfishness and I got mine, and if you don't have yours, it's too bad for you that the market works that way. We have in here a return to the notion of data-driven policies rather than ideologically driven policies. We are funding the creation of a broadband map and a national broadband plan because it finally is clear to us that when it comes to trying to achieve these goals for a critical piece of our infrastructure, we cannot do that without real data, and real data doesn't just fall out of the sky on you. And that the effort by the FCC in the last 10 years to simply ask providers to please provide what information they think it might be useful for them to provide in order to shape broadband policy has been a failure, and we really need to approach this in a hard-headed and scientific fashion. So all of these things combine into one final piece, which is not actually in the Stimulus Act, but is in how it's being carried out, the notion of all elements of the government working together for one common policy. We are seeing, as this plays out, NTIA and RUS working both with each other, with the FCC, with the Office of Management and Budget, with intergovernmental task forces to try to effectuate the broader purposes of the statute. All of this signals the notion of a government that is not broken up into little stovepipes and fiefs that people run for their own narrow ends, but the notion of a coherent national policy in which all branches of the government are actually trying to serve that end. Again, that's a very significant shift from the last 8 years, and frankly, I think a significant shift from the last 20 or 30 years. We are moving to the concept of a broadband ecology. The notion that we value broadband for what it does for people's lives, and therefore our focus on broadband must not be only on laying lines, on tracking speed, on looking to see what is potentially available to people, but on the mechanisms in which we make this available and make this access real to everyone, regardless of their income, regardless of their geographic location. These are extremely important and lofty goals And they are valuable, as the statute says repeatedly here and in these other areas that Jim points out, because we have an administration now that genuinely believes that broadband is valuable for what it does, not just because it's a cool technology that we would like to have, and therefore we have to make that access real to people. Finally, attendant on this and attendant to this notion of a public interest in broadband, we have a very strong message to carriers. It's not all about you. Broadband policy, such as it has been since the first report generated by Section 706 of the Telecommunications Act, has all been about how do we incent the market? How do we bribe carriers? How do we get carriers to invest? How do we think about how to get these guys to do what we want them to do, and we beg and we plead, and we give them what they want. And this statute says, no, it's not all about you. You can't even get this money unless there is a determination that giving it to you would serve the public interest. We start with who's eligible, those despised entities of yesteryear, and I mean literally as of last year they were despised, state and local governments and nonprofit entities. These are the ones who are presumed under the statute to be most in tune with the philosophy of the broadband ecology. Now, we do not exclude the private sector by any sense of the imagination, and we do not, make them ineligible. There were proposals to go explicitly through the states. Instead, there is a notion of this is an area that is affected by the public interest, and if you are going to take public money to build this out, then we are only going to do that if there is a real finding that serves the public interest. I expect that under the public interest standard that will be adopted, there will be provisions that will allow private sector entities to apply. I expect, as the legislative history strongly recommends, that we will see classes of entities like carriers, like equipment providers, that will be granted the ability to receive funds. But it will be on an understanding that that's not because it's all about them and that only the private sector can provide it. It will be on the understanding that the private sector is one important element of this ecology in making this work. We have affirmed the concepts of network neutrality, interconnection, and the value of competition. Again, having had numerous arguments with those who want to say that Congress's determination not to limit the authority of the FCC to just the four principles in the proposed legislation in 2006 meant that Congress thought net neutrality was stupid and contrary to the FCC's authority. I am pleased to see Congress now affirm in the Stimulus Act that the FCC's Internet Policy Statement and its four freedoms are the bare minimum of what is considered necessary and essential to protect competition and freedom of expression online. It's been underlined and underscored, and so has the value of interconnection. The notion that was fostered by Michael Powell and then carried on by Kevin Martin as part of the policy of intermodal rather than intramodal competition, that we were going to encourage people to just keep building redundant networks and that was the only way to do this because, of course, in the ownership society, whoever builds the network owns the network. That is no longer the core value around which we are organizing this. Interconnection is back. The value of competition is back. And the value of network neutrality has been affirmed. We have shattered, last and most important of all, we have proven that it is possible to do business in a new way here in Washington, D.C. During the course of the debate around the stimulus package, I continually heard from people how net neutrality wasn't going to be in there. When it was in there, it was going to be pulled. That there was no way this was going to be done by grants, this was going to be all tax relief. That, of course, everything that the carriers were demanding and talking about was going to be met. That, all of the traditional wisdom about who runs things in Washington, D.C. and how it works and how helpless we all are turned out to be wrong. We got a program which could have been designed by the people in this room as a way of emphasizing the importance of broadband and how we should be thinking about it as a society. I would invite people here to consider what else may be wrong about the conventional wisdom and our ability to shape the policies that are coming out of Washington, D.C. I know that last year, when we were here at this conference, a lot of people were very concerned about the direction things were going. And as I said yesterday, welcome back to the fight. This time I know our side will win. I should leaven this with a quick word of caution. No program is perfect. There will be games played. Incumbents will get money. If the standard of lobbying and government policy is perfection, then this too will fail, like everything will fail if perfection is the standard. The question for me is, have we maximized the opportunity to get good results and minimize the likelihood of bad results? And I think we're on our way to that. But the second caution is, we haven't really done anything yet. We have a very good beginning here. And it will be up to us now to put up or shut up, and up to us to make sure that NTIA and RUS and the FCC are receiving the necessary participation and support so that they can base good programs. We have to be wary of the influence of Congress. We need to understand that the incumbents are not going to die easily. I don't want them to die, actually. I actually don't have anything against them. I just want them to work for a living. But we have a hearing in 90 days. We can expect that there will be, members of Congress that will push the conventional wisdom, push to, why don't you, not regulate? Why don't you do what the carriers ask? Why don't you do this the old ways? We need to be the counter pressure on that. I conclude right at the line here by saying that we have here an enormous opportunity, and it would be a great shame, and it would be a tremendous loss if we were to allow it to slip through our fingers, either because we are convinced that we are powerless, or because we believe that now that we have good people who have been able to make such a good start, that they no longer need our help.
I'm afraid that I am the buzzkill after that. Because here's my page of bad news. Although I will start and say that speaking, if I may, on behalf of local governments, and I speak here in my personal capacity and also as a board member of NTOA, with my president sitting right there, so give me the nod if I'm speaking officially. Thank you, Mary Beth. And NTOA is the national association that represents local governments and communities promoting our interests in communications. But I'll start by saying on behalf of all of us that I totally agree with the very positive, more than positive readings of the Act that we have heard in the past 40 minutes or so. We are elated. We're euphoric. We are the community that has spent a lot of the past 10 or so, the last 10 years or so, on the receiving end of carrier attempts to limit our authority over our own roads, over our own public safety facilities, and to preempt us from participating in any way in the broadband world, including to meet our own needs and to meet the needs of our communities. There are some states that still preclude us from taking part in public-private partnerships unless we go through certain steps in order to do so, all of which are not reasonable steps. And you can imagine who wrote those laws. So from our standpoint, just the fact that this piece of legislation includes us as eligible entities, but as central eligible entities that recognizes the localism of the broadband issue, that recognizes that local communities and local governments and local nonprofits understand their needs and concerns in ways that big corporations headquartered far away do not, cannot by their very nature, because they understand a different set of needs and concerns, and that recognizes that broadband has to serve all of those local needs and concerns. That central insight is just huge from our standpoint. So with that as a starting point, and
and with a ditto to much of what I just heard, let me tell you about some of the things that we have seen evolving here in Washington over the past month or so that I would say are not reason to panic or even to be angry, but are reason for concern and engagement by the community that includes local governments, nonprofits, the public interest community, and those who are interested in seeing communications networks that serve the public interest and the national interest rather than narrow interests. And I think that includes most of us in this room. So here are some of the areas of concern. The first one is that we have seen over the course of the hearings that were sponsored here in Washington over the past few weeks, something of a rural versus metro debate. And I think that we are seeing this within what let's call our broader family of all of those here who are concerned about public interest networks. There's a justifiable feeling on the part of many that it would somehow be grossly unfair if some of this money goes to suburban and urban areas before everybody in rural areas is served. And I understand and respect that feeling, and I think many of the digital inclusion communities feel that way, many of the rural groups feel that way. I am concerned, though, that a fight among us and between us over rural versus metro serves none of our purposes. If anything, it serves the purposes of those who would prefer not to see competition, because if they can't get this money themselves, what they would really like to see is it going into the most mountainous, most remote areas, the places where they never, ever plan to compete, where they will never invest themselves, and so it will not in any way disrupt their business models. Now, that's not to say that there shouldn't be broadband in those areas. There should. There's no question about that. That's a given among all of us. But if we are not able to use this funding, which is first time in my career such a thing has been available. I mean, I don't have that long a memory, but it's long enough that I go back a couple of administrations. This feels like a singular occasion. I hope it's the first of many, but it is the first. If we can use this money to create a wide variety of different projects to demonstrate that a different model, a model that's not just about delivering television, a model that is not just about triple play services and that's not just about squeezing every dime out of local communities possible in order to enrich some company that has no investment in the community, if we can show that a different model is possible in lots of different kinds of areas and regions and with lots of different kinds of stakeholders and communities and lots of different technologies, then the $7 billion will have not only served a lot of unserved and underserved and community institutions and vulnerable populations and public safety and all the other things, but it will also have pointed the way to a different kind of communications future that will serve as a justification and a demonstration for future investment and for future involvement by the federal government, which is the key thing that until now has differentiated us from the countries in Europe and in Asia that are doing this really well, that are beating the pants off of us. And the reason they are doing it is because they have central government involvement, and that is what we have not had. Now we have it, and we have to show how it can serve all kinds of purposes in the future and why there should be more. That is why I am really concerned about this rural versus metro feel. There's not enough money in the bill to serve all the unserved in rural areas, or even all the unserved in urban areas, and there are many unserved in urban areas. That's an important thing to point out. Unserved is not just a rural issue. And there's not enough money to serve all the underserved. We can't do any one thing, but maybe we can do a lot of small things and create demonstrations of what the future might look like, of what real innovation and applications and new kinds of stakeholders and new kinds of users might be, and then we can leverage that and we can realize efficiencies from that, and perhaps we'll see private sector partners develop new innovations and new technologies that will enable us to spread that more broadly. So that's the first thought, and I think the way that this could play out is in the definition of underserved primarily, more so than unserved, because I think there's probably some kind of agreement on what unserved means, although I'm willing to be corrected on that if I'm wrong. But when it comes to underserved, I think that there is a wide range of different places we could be. So how many people here think that you are served if you get 1.5 megabits down and somewhere around 200 kilobits up? 1.5 hands. I don't know how enthusiastic you are. So I followed the NTIA meetings, and I spoke at one of them, and that was the range of what everybody was talking about. Every industry got up and talked about their technology, and they said, underserved is right below the level at which my industry sells services. And we are the perfect conduit by which you can serve the underserved, because we sell just above the way I just defined underserved. And everything was in the range of, at best, a few megabits per second. We're really concerned that if we define what is served, what is broadband at that level, we are giving up any hope of even wanting to be in a different place than we are right now as a nation, as communities. The international standard for broadband in cities such as Amsterdam, and we have great representation from Amsterdam here, a city that is really showing us a way that municipalities can be involved in this world. The international standard is 100 megabits symmetrical, scaling to a gigabit symmetrical, and probably in the next 10 years to 10 gigabit symmetrical and more. I mean, you know this stuff better than I do. You are truly the community that understands that, and that is where the definition of broadband should be. And no. Thanks. I'm actually used to getting all kinds of shocked responses, so I'm glad. All right, we're all on the same page there. Let's think about underserved as being less than that, and let's think about as a broader community wanting served to be all of us at that level. And that's where local governments are coming from. That's what we would like our communities to have. I know that the money can't fund all projects that reach those kinds of speeds. I know that wireless can't reach those kinds of speeds realistically. It doesn't mean that we won't fund that sort of thing, but let's think aspirationally about where we're going, and that is the big picture. For the advocates and activists in this room, it doesn't seem to be a surprise. I hope for those on the policymaking side in this room or listening, you'll think about defining broadband in an aspirational way rather than in an unhappily pragmatic way about what can we do tomorrow. Let's not think about it that way. That would be a concession. That would be a willingness to be not second rate or third rate, but to say, okay, we're 17th in the world, what the heck, let's fall behind further. Let's not do that, and let's let the definition of underserved serve us to understand that just because a community has DSL or cable modem service doesn't mean it can compete with its competitor communities in Asia or in Europe. It doesn't mean it can deliver the kinds of healthcare and the kinds of education and the other kinds of innovations and important services that are possible, and that we have a long way to go and we may not get all the way there right now, but that we can't start thinking about a lousy technology, an older technology that delivers much less as being served just because it delivers a little bit more than others have. I'm running really short on time, so let me quickly address the one other key issue that we are concerned about from one of the other key issues we're concerned about on the local government side. And that is, what is the role of states and how will it best serve the purposes of the Act? And let me start with saying that if Sharon Gillette were in charge of broadband initiatives in every state in the United States, I would be saying something very different right now. And it is always a pleasure to see her and a great privilege to sit on the same panel. So, and thank you for all your work and for providing a guide, I would hope, for many other states. Not all states are... Not all states are fortunate enough to have Sharon Gillette, and we understand that states are a very important player in this. We also understand that they are eligible for funds in the same way that localities and nonprofits are, And we are a little bit concerned that there is a conflict of interest in their role as an advisor to NTIA and in their role as a potential applicant to NTIA. And we hope that NTIA will be conscious of that, and that because there are so many projects, and there are so many, I can't speak for the private sector, but I can tell you on the local government side, I don't know of a single community that hasn't been thinking about broadband and connectivity and communications infrastructure and planning in some way over the past few years, and they're all writing grant applications. So there are so many projects out there, and they're competing with each other, and it means localities are competing with states. And there's a real risk there that if the states have enormous influence, it will cut out local input, local decision making. I would hope that the states will look for a lot of that local input and decision making and will work with localities on projects. In some states that will happen, in others it will not. There's also a risk that with states there will be certain kinds of political influence and perhaps private sector influence, and there are some states where at the state level there is significant private sector influence, and that will lead to investment and allocation decisions that are not serving the goals of the Act and that are not serving the public interest in the sense of more bandwidth, better bandwidth, serving the unserved, underserved, etc. And that's a real concern. And for us, the key illustration of this is that there are 15 states, and Jim Ballard is the great expert on this subject, so I defer to him on detail, but there are 15 states in the United States that in some form or another preclude localities from being in this field. And yet the Recovery Act explicitly makes us eligible. That in itself tells us something about where those states are and how they think about us and how they think about how the money should be allocated within those states. There are 2 bills pending in 2 states right now. One is North Carolina and one is Pennsylvania that would specifically preclude localities from applying for this money. The North Carolina law was defeated last year and it came back. It was introduced day before yesterday. The Pennsylvania law, I mean, what can one say about that? You probably all remember that battle in the wireless era. Every state will have a different entity that oversees broadband stimulus planning and that consults presumably to NTIA. There will not be a whole lot of uniformity, and in some cases it may be an entity that is thinking in the kinds of terms I just described. And so we are concerned, and we think justifiably so, and that we hope that NTIA will very aggressively take seriously its responsibility to evaluate every grant application on its merits based on the purposes of the Recovery Act. We'll take into consideration what it hears from the states, but will be very actively involved in meeting the obligations upon it to determine where funding should go and how it would best serve the public interest and the goals of the Act. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Yes, Jim.
Can we react to each other?
Actually, I have a slightly different idea of how I'd like to see this go. I've got a lot of questions myself, and I'd like to exercise moderator's prerogative and ask them. I think I've been a pretty good boy and let the audience have a lot of airtime, but I'm burning with curiosity about so many things here. First, Sharon, that map obviously reflects a very different reality than the FCC's one user per zip code data, where, yeah, you can do that or turn on your whatever you want, however you want to do it. But where did that map come from?
Can I, let's see, am I on? No.
I don't know.
I'm on now, there we go, yeah. What I'm going to do is answer where the map came from, and then while someone else speaks, I'll dig up the comparison slides, which are also online somewhere. I just have to find them.
Okay.
That show you our map versus the FCC map.
Oh, cool.
Which I presented at the NTIA's hearing on mapping. Some of you I know I saw there last week. or 2 weeks ago, whenever it was. I feel like I've been living on an airplane to D.C. lately, so I'm losing track of time.
See, this map reflects to me the reality that I know exists in Massachusetts.
So this map reflects one reality, and I have to say one of the things I said at the NTIA hearing was it's not a map, it's a mapping. It's multiple maps, and it's mapping is over time. But to give you a sense of where this map came from, you know, we were in this case where the FCC map shows the FCC map. I'll bring it up for you in a minute, but it shows nothing in Massachusetts as having 0 providers, and it shows great swaths of the Berkshire. The red spine over there is the Berkshire Mountains. It's hills and trees. That's why it's hard to serve. And it doesn't have very many people in it. There might be 10,000 people in all of those towns. It's very sparsely populated, and it's mountainous, it's rugged. So, and it has trees, so wireless is hard, okay? We had all these complaints from constituents, and we had an FCC map that was telling us that everybody was served. Not only were they served, but they had multiple providers, which was humorous. So the question was, and they've changed their map, in fairness to the FCC, they've updated their methodology, you know, they've listened to some of the complaints and so on. But this was in 2006, using their map at that time. So what we actually did to create this map was 2 things. First of all, I know you've all heard of Connected Nation. We're not Connected Nation. We're the people who Connected Nation stole the name from, which is the granddaddy of the Connects, which was Berkshire Connect, which Berkshire's is the western county. The far west of Massachusetts is Berkshire County. And they were a group of users who did demand aggregation, but really what they did was agitate. They were out there saying, you know, we need more telecom infrastructure in Western Mass. And at the time, they were focused on business users. It was an economic development issue, not a this was about 1996, 7, 8, we're talking about. Residential broadband was not seen as essential at that time, but business user broadband was, and T1s cost way too much, and so they really agitated, and they did attract a provider to the region using an RFP. The provider at the time was Global Crossing. Global Crossing does still exist, and a lot of that infrastructure still exists, whether it's run by Global Crossing or not. But in any case, they're the quintessential user group, and that effort spawned another effort, which was known as Franklin County Connect, and later merged into the whole region a little bit east of the Berkshires, which we call Pioneer Valley, and that became Pioneer Valley Connect. And these groups are still out there, and they're still active. They don't have a lot of funds, but they're still out there, and they still do quite a few. They did some pilots of Wi-Fi technology hotspots in some of these towns.
Bandwidth aggregation.
No, not so much bandwidth aggregation, just a Wi-Fi hotspot in one of these red towns. There were 3 red towns were selected to put up a Wi-Fi hotspot in these towns and see what would happen. And those were very interesting experiments. But one of them was, one of the things they found, the Globe had this article about people in these towns started noticing the car outside in the parking lot at night outside the town hall or outside the public library. And what was it doing there? Well, the library was closed or the town hall was closed, but there was mom and there was the middle schooler with the laptop doing the homework. You know, it's cold in Massachusetts in the winter that people would do this. It's pathetic. I mean, it shows how much hunger there was for this kind of service. But that was what we learned from the hotspot experiment, was there's a lot of demand for this. People in rural areas aren't any different from people in urban areas. They want this. They want it even more because they have to drive further to do anything. And the second thing we learned was, you know, even though people really want it, they've never experienced Wi-Fi. There's a lot of plug and futs that goes on at the beginning, and people need support through that because they're not in dense apartment buildings where they have a neighbor they can just go knock on the door and say, how do I get the Wi-Fi to work? You know, there's a certain amount of support that goes with it. So those were 2 things we really learned from that project. But to go back, the Connects knew which communities had broadband, which did not, because they're run by people who live there, because this is, you know, who you meet at the local town store. You know, this is the community. It's community driven. People who live there know this. And so really based on their knowledge, I feel the Western Mass piece of this is extremely accurate. In addition to knowing what the Connects were already telling us about what was available in these different communities, we did a survey. And we basically, I don't remember exactly all the media, but I remember it involved a lot of phone calling. They basically spoke with town administrators in each of these towns and asked them which of these categories they would fall into. I mean, there are limits to surveys, and I know John Hargan spoke about this at the NTIA hearing. There are limits to surveys. People will tell you wrong information. They're not always correct. So, you know, I later got calls, are you sure Fall River is underserved? Okay, I went and looked, and, the question was Fall River, the town administrator in Fall River told us he couldn't get broadband, so we labeled it as underserved. But could he get broadband? Do we know for sure? I wouldn't vouch 100% for the accuracy of every other community in the state. But I know certainly west of 495, everything in the western two-thirds of the state, I feel very confident in this data. We are engaged in another mapping exercise to get this much more granular, and one of the other things I should say here, these red communities or unserved communities, when the governor announced this in August '07 and then filed the bill in October, and then the hearing for the bill was in February, and we were going to have a big conference with a lot of, Senator Kerry was going to speak, and Lieutenant Governor, I believe, was coming. A lot of dignitaries were coming, and it was scheduled for March 1st in Northampton, Massachusetts, and in light of that conference being scheduled, Verizon made an announcement. The conference was subsequently canceled because of a blizzard. That's it, it's cold in Mass. On March 1st, we still have blizzards. But the announcement was that they were going to turn on DSL in about two-thirds of these red communities. So about 24 of these towns now have are not red anymore. They are now orange because they now have DSL in part of the community. And as a public official, you learn so much serving in government. One of the things I learned is, which do you think is worse? Is it worse to have your whole town not wired, or to have your neighbor have DSL and you don't? And we get, really angry letters if the neighbor has it. It proves that, happiness is relative. But I feel for the folks. It's got to be very frustrating to see somebody down the street who's got the DSL and you can't get it. To your point, Joanne, I don't disagree with you. Where I would just say is there, and if you remember, the House version of the bill had big milestones in it, which I thought were interestingly chosen to really stimulate new things as opposed to same old, same old. And I think that was very valuable, but just the question I would just raise is, for folks who can't get anything today, they want something. Now, folks in Western Mass, DSL wasn't what they were hoping for. They were all hoping for fiber to the home. But I think that those who have DSL are happier than when they didn't have DSL, even though they would still love to have fiber to the home. So I think there's a tension. It's just, I think where the standards need to be set is what can we afford. But how do we know what we can afford? I think that's a little bit tricky. So just throw out that thought. And
thank you. So, I'd love to see that. I have another question, unless you guys have burning responses. Go on, Harold.
I did want to respond to the last point that was made because I think it's important. And it goes back to an idea that there is not enough money here for anything, in the sense that, as Joanne pointed out, we will not get broadband to all of the people who don't have anything now. And I agree 100% with Sharon, and therefore I think that to some degree the map points the way, if you will, is that part of this is an exercise to shame the existing providers. And I hope that when NTIA is looking at this, they are looking to provide a good mix of projects, that there will be urban, that there will be rural, that there will be fiber, there will be wireless, that there will be a whole mix, precisely because, in part, it is worse for Congress if that guy over there in that town got it, and this guy over here doesn't, and they will be on the phone to their member of Congress saying, there needs to be this in my town. I want you to put more money in the next budget so that my town gets this.
As I said at the outset, I think it's important, again, look at the statute. And the statute on the NTIA side doesn't favor one purpose over another. Unserved, underserved, public safety, demand, they're all there. And again, the priority of the act is American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. It is jobs, it is economic development. And I think that is, at the end of the day, what NTIA is going to get pulled forward with as it looks at these projects. And I agree with where Joanne was going on this. And it's not aspirational, necessarily. At the end of next year, Verizon will have 50% of their access lines covered by FiOS. UVerse will cover 50 to 60%. Those speeds are what the speeds are in 2010 when this money is being given out.
I found the map. There's the map.
Oh,
That was the
okay.
FCC
But
version.
before you, I just want to say,
Our thing.
ain't the internet wonderful? Look, there's Dirk. He left here about an hour and a half ago, and he's listening, and he's in the airport lounge probably over at Dulles. So anyway, what? Oh,
The internet's even
I
better.
thought you were virtual.
Wow.
It's an avatar.
You came back. Boy, isn't reality wonderful? So I'm sorry. Joanne has her. Sharon has the map, but you want to? Jim, go.
I just wanted to make one point about the nature of where we are right now. I have Harold on my right and Tom on my left, and it's important to recognize that we're not talking here about the final broadband strategy or policy for our country, and that has pros and cons that have to be recognized in this debate. For one thing, if you're talking about giving away 80% of the capital costs of a project, you're in a very different position than you're in if you're saying we're now going to adopt standards and apply them to existing projects that weren't funded that way, and so on and so forth. And so it seems, to me at least, and I, wearing my broadband coalition hat, have done a lot of listening to people on all sides of all issues. We have a tremendous amount of work yet to do to define how these concepts are going to play themselves out going forward. There's no victory here, long-term victory on network neutrality. We don't even have a consensus on what those terms mean and how they would be applied. We have the FCC's 4 principles that at a minimum are to be applied in the BTOP program. Those principles are not self-enforcing. We don't even know what they mean and how they would be applied. So what's important is that we have a dialogue for the first time seriously with multiple players across the board, but we have lots of work to go. And I repeat again that the stimulus that this is creating is a stimulus that I think ultimately will be most important because of this dialogue that it is stimulating with all of the uncertainties in this act.
Sharon, more on the map. You were going to explain a little more about the process.
Well, I think I explained how we came to our map, and basically the bottom line is it's community-driven. It was done based a lot on previous groundwork that had been laid by Berkshire Connect and Pioneer Valley Connect, which, by the way, have now merged into Western Mass Connect. So we're all about regionalism. That's new for us in New England, right? A home rule state, right? Anyway, this was the FCC's map. But the comment, and you can see there's nothing. Green would be nothing, and there is no nothing. The point I wanted to come back to was just the point about map versus maps versus mapping, which is that the maps that I'm showing you, and this map as well, our map of maps, are really focused on constituents, and they were really aimed at the legislature to help them understand, because with most of the population in Mass is in the eastern half, and most of the land is in the western half. So, the legislature is mostly people from the eastern half, because that's how it works. So most of them did not really understand the concept that there would be people without broadband. We had one of our legislators who couldn't get broadband at home. So, to be disconnected is really hard to imagine if you've been connected and you're blogging all the time. It's difficult to remember what it's like to be disconnected. So that was one of the motivations for doing a map like that, was to help bring it home. But there are other aspects other than residential that are equally important, and I've been trying to keep half an eye on the comments here. Somebody's mentioned middle mile. I would also point out, business class services, big fat pipes for businesses, and those have not been mapped in my state or any other state, to my knowledge. It's not just a constituent in a residential. It's also what kind of big fat pipe infrastructure is there for at affordable cost for small businesses as well. And some of the middle mile pieces are equally important. So. And exactly. So those are not captured by a map like what we did. And one of the questions I had for NTI is, there's lots of dimensions of this. Which ones are you intending to capture? And please don't try to put them all on one map, or no one will be able to read it. But you can have multiple layers. So.
Sometimes a public good is also sensitive business information, and there's
Indeed.
the rub.
Indeed.
I'm going to jump in here and respond to Tom's comment, which I agree with you. I think 98% we are on the same page, and I appreciate everything you said. I will say, though, that I think the example of Verizon and its fiber-to-the-home networks actually demonstrate why community-based initiatives and public interest projects are so important, because Verizon has built, to its credit, this really tremendous infrastructure. And here in this region, you can buy services on it, but there is no real competition with the cable companies. The speeds and the prices are going to be roughly the same as you will get on cable modem. So in the $40, $50, $60 range, you'll be getting up to, and I don't have to tell this audience what that language means, up to 20, maybe 25 down, and up to 3, 5, 10 up, depending on where you are. You can buy 50 megabits, up to 50 megabits symmetrical from Verizon in some parts of this area, and it'll be $140 a month. And they do not offer a residential product above that. They are not offering what Dirk is offering, which is 100 megabits symmetrical, and Dirk is testing a gigabit symmetrical. Am I right about that? Okay. Verizon's not doing that, and I don't blame them, because they're a thoughtful company looking to the bottom line, and they don't have anything to compete with. They don't have a public interest driver to do it. They don't have a public interest rationale. They don't have anybody forcing them to do it, and there's nobody competing with them to make them do it. So there's.
Technology is obsolete. They can't do it.
It's okay. Keep going.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't understand, although I would. But you get my point. I respect and admire what that network does and what it is capable of doing, but I don't subscribe to it myself, because at the price that I want to pay, I can get my competitive cable provider, which I think needs supporters. I buy RCN service because I would like the small guy to actually have some success, and RCN can compete at cable modem speeds, and so Verizon's not offering me anything on price or speed that come together that's better than what RCN is offering me, unless I want to spend a lot more money. So that is why community initiatives, the kinds of things that this money could fund, will drive us to develop different kinds of models. And that is this incredible insight and opportunity that I hope we don't lose.
Before we leave maps and mapping, Drew Clark from Broadband Census has been an activist in this area and has a comment or question.
Actually, a brief comment and then a brief question. So thank you, Dave. We've been trying to create a public alternative where speed, price, availability, competition is out there. And the comment was directed at Sharon. Behind each of these maps that you've shown us is carrier level data. So Massachusetts has publicly released the names of the carriers that offer service in each of these townships or zip codes levels. So we've been able to put that data in broadbandcensus.com, and hence we have better data in broadband census for Massachusetts and other states. The question was about the utility of mapping, and I have had some conversations with people of the sort that would be in this room about what's the purpose. We know that we need fiber everywhere, so let's just get a demographic map of where people are or aren't, and the sort of density, so to speak, and build fiber everywhere. Versus, the approach I've taken, which is there is some level of competition out there. It's not necessarily good enough, but you want to know what the landscape is like and who the competitors are, so that there can be a public policy reason for channeling your dollars in a particular place.
I'm not. Little microphone swap there. I'm not sure exactly if this is how you intended the question, but I think that number one, we do need to know what's out there before deciding on where to spend the money. Even if we were going to say, let's do fiber everywhere, I think we would still want to know, where is fiber being deployed now, and who's got, how do we triage the situation so that we know where to put the fiber. But I also think you raise a somewhat more fundamental question, which is, if we figure out what mapping is about, we know what we should be mapping. And a lot of times with these things, I am concerned that when we talk about the broadband map and when we talk about the National Broadband Plan, and then when we talk about the notion of a broader broadband ecology, that we do this because we're interested in how it impacts people's lives. Not everybody may necessarily agree with my last statement on this, but if that's the case, then our maps need to be more sophisticated. We have been very focused in a period when we were only concerned about, are we laying lines and do we have bits moving in speed and bits, and can you at your address get somebody to come and give you DSL or cable or some other service. I certainly hope that as we start thinking about this more, we will map socioeconomic factors that may be correlated with broadband deployment and broadband uptake, that we will actually start thinking about, the broadband uptake factor as well as the broadband accessibility, that we will include community access points not as substitutes for private subscription, because there are a lot of studies, starting with the Pew Internet and the Home studies, that show that having broadband in the home is transformative. And I personally think that the image that you were describing there of somebody in a New England winter out in a parking lot, we had yesterday, Tom Friedman had his slide of people doing their homework at an airport, because that's the only place where there was electricity. We've replicated that in this country with regard to broadband. Go us. But I do hope that the map becomes more sophisticated as we start to move from filling in this basic lay of the land hole to more of a, why are we making a map and what are we looking for?
And Drew, I would add that much as some of us would like to see it, we're not going to lay fiber everywhere, next year or the year after, until we really see a change in the way we view this whole issue. So as a practical matter, we certainly do need the maps. And in the energy area, for example, we have the Energy Information Agency cranking out energy data month in and month out. We have a database. It's very reliable. It's been in existence for years. Anybody can go to it and get relevant data for any number of purposes. At some point, we need to start the process of having a reliable database. The idea that any individual can pick up the phone and call or dial in or do something and find out whether data is available or not available, what it costs and whatever, but you can't do that in an aggregate sort of way, just seems to stand issues of privacy and confidential information on their heads. If you can get information, it's available in the public domain, why shouldn't we be capturing it and using it in a way that works for everyone?
Question. Tom Cohen, at the recent Fiber to the Home Council workshop, when you spoke about, you did actually some elaboration on when you apply, you need to stand in the shoes of the people who are reviewing those applications and making those decisions. And you, I thought, said some very interesting things about what standing in those shoes must feel like. Could you elaborate a little for us?
I was giving the simple version so far.
It's not on.
It's on. Okay. What we have, as I said at the outset here, is an incredibly daunting task for these agencies to get the money out the door. And I guarantee you, having been on that side of the table, That's what's on their minds. What's on their minds is not being on the front page of the Washington Post, getting chewed out for doing something wrong. These applications are, or should be, business plans. You are asking for a lot of money. I don't care if it's a WISP for $250,000 or someone with a fiber project for 40 or 50 million, or someone going even, beyond that. It's a lot of money, and these people want to feel confident that what you have there is a bona fide application from someone who actually is going to pull this off. And so this really has to be thought of as not like a minor grant application, but as a full-blown business plan. That is, what's the network going to look like? What are your numbers going to look like on this? And sort of a project plan of how it's going to get done. I mean, it's got to be serious. And what you want to do is package it from beginning to end. There are lots of requirements in the Act. I talked about on the RUS side, preferences for current borrowers. Well, there's also a preference for unserved areas. And there's also preferences for bringing competition to an area, just the opposite. You want to meet those things. We talked about community anchor institutions. You want to serve them, particularly the NTIA program. The more things you do to do their job for them and make them look good, the better chance you are to have a high score in this competitive scoring. And let me just add to that. The president on March 20th put out a memorandum to all agencies, and it said you will give these awards based on merit. Okay, it's nice to see that, and you shall not give them out imprudently. And again, it talked about the need for jobs and economic output as part of that. And so you need to think about what that scoring system is like and put together a serious business plan to meet it. I understand there have been some very brief plans put in already. Those won't cut it. I don't mean to say you need to do what has happened in the past for, and will keep on going, for RUS loans. Yes, I think Jim's got the right height there. 2 to 3 feet, that's going to cost you $500,000 or more to put in. That's not going to be there, but you're going to need that data and the evidence supporting it that you can really accomplish what you're setting out to do. This is serious here.
Okay, so I have this idea. I've got this mobile AutoNet mobile broadband router, and I think that it should go in every school bus in my state so the kids can, whatever, IM with their friends on the way to school or whatever they want. But I think it would add value to their lives if it was in every school bus in the state. It's shovel ready. You just go down and buy 10,000 of these and put wire it into the school bus wire. And so how do I turn that into a grant application?
I have to say I am probably the most liberal on this panel and possibly in this room about what NTIA should be funding, and I would say hell no. Please stay home. And the reason I would do that is because while I believe that we have to have innovative programs, and I think that we need to be looking at things that are inventive, that this is not about wild experiments. You know, what Tom and Jim here have been saying is very right, and not just for the people at NTA whom I like, who I would hate to see embarrassed, but also because I want Congress to see value in this and fund again. And, you know, if we have an experiment like this that does not have real strong reason to believe that it's going to produce the metrics that we're promising, then Congress is never going to touch this again with a 10-foot pole, and that would be a disaster. So I would say that if the question is, well, then how do we find if your idea works, number one, maybe this fund is not actually for you. This fund is not for everything.
Hey, got it.
Yeah.
Got it. I want to hear from the other members of the panel. Thank you, Harold.
Well, I for one would not make the decision for NTIA that project is not fundable. I would say look at the criteria, look at what of these criteria fit for that project, and then envision what other projects are going to be submitted, and then decide for yourself whether your project has a reasonable prospect of success or not, and then someone will decide. There could be a way to justify that project in terms of jobs or in terms of other things. They don't come immediately to mind, but if you can do that, if you can, I don't see jobs out of that, although there could be, there could be. So look at the criteria in the statute, follow the debate of what people are suggesting, look at the rules. The rules will spell out what the criteria
Okay,
are.
I got it. Next. Thanks. I mean, really, let's try and keep.
Hypothetically, if it was a good proposal, what would be the step?
Yes.
And let me give something more. Again, if you need to look at, there are models out there of money that has gone out the door. I suggest you look at what the California Advanced Broadband Task Force has been funding. Advanced services. They've given out roughly 8 to 10 million of their total 100 million so far. Look at those applications. They've done a nice job, I think. Look at Connect Me, the main program, and what they've given out. There's some real good examples. And then I suggest as well, you can look at, again, I'll point to what we put in as rules for RUS or NTIA. We put in what an application should look like. That is what you need to have part of it. And if you can show me your last 5 years of financials and the like, I mean,
Got to show last 5 years.
Yeah, well, that's. Okay. I mean, I think you're the government here, and you want to see there are real bona fide providers who are coming forward, people with expertise and alike. I mean, Harold's point is a very good one about this program, and I will tell you, I'd be on the edge of my seat for the next 15 months, about that. There are occasions in Washington where we get these eruptions, these blips of policy, breakup of AT&T, the 96 Act. I think this is one of them, and Joanne was alluding to it a bit before, singular time. The question that Jim has posed and Harold has correctly posed is it a singular time, or is there something else that's going to follow? And I think a part of it is how this program gets carried out.
Sharon?
Okay, so I would say, and part of that is up to us. It's up to the people in this room. I mean, if we make good use of these funds and we have good things to demonstrate at the end of it, there's a possibility for more. If it all looks, Proxmire Golden Fleece Awards at the end of the day, they're not going to, that's going to make it a lot harder. And unfortunately, the way the world works, if the Golden Fleece goes to one project and the rest of them are all very meritorious, it could still get torpedoed. So I think the NTIA folks will have to be very careful. I did want to just ask you a question about that. The NTIA program is looking at underserved, however that's defined, public safety, and then they also have a demand side or an adoption side, if you will, and that also has a list which I don't have exactly to mind, but I recall that it includes, low income, elderly, basically populations that have not adopted broadband historically in the past. So I think I'm not rejecting your idea whole hog. I'm asking, how does helping school kids do more of what they already are quite happy to do? How's that going to play? So that's how I think about it. But I also want to ask you, the other thing, just another very important aspect about these grants, they're capital grants. Everything you can spend, you can get, even if you get the capital free, you still have to operate something. And a number of people have been making this comment here in the comments.
Unless waived.
What is the match? There's a match.
You have to put 20% of your own money in, unless
but that's,
it's waived.
again, that's CapEx. Again, that's CapEx.
Got it.
The OpEx is not addressed here. And I think that leaves a big opening for the FCC, perhaps, to rethink how somebody mentioned the $6 billion in Universal Service Fund. OpEx money that's out there every year that, maybe that needs to be rethought.
Good
In
point.
this
Joanne, any comments on that? Or that, if it's covered, it's covered. Okay, next thing I'd like to do, is it covered?
Well, is your project a CapEx or an OpEx? That's what I was having trouble figuring out.
Right. That's a good response to what I said.
This is probably repetitive, but I don't think this money is for startups. This is for real projects that can happen, that show they know what to do, that have built infrastructure, that can demonstrate they know how to operate infrastructure, they can bring partnerships, they can write a business plan, all of that. And we want it to be that.
That there is, I should add that there is not one minor, it's $250 million of funding on the sustainability side that may be a little more for new ideas. Again, though, it's a lot of money, and the agencies can't give out a lot of little grants and at the end of the day give out $7 billion. We will be here for many years waiting for that. I think the money needs to be given out in bigger chunks.
But I was just going to say it's $250 million, but don't forget that's nationwide. There are 50-plus states because D.C. counts and a few others count. So that's roughly, it's not even $5 million per state. That's really not very much.
Well, and that's for the sustainability money, but I'm talking about the overall money.
Right, the overall, I agree with you. Right. I'm just saying in the sustainability piece.
Yeah, if they do that.
Well, at the hearing last week on the role of the states, NARUC proposed that at least the first tranche of money be divided equally among the states, and by their calculation, that worked out to $36 million per state. Mm-hmm. Therefore, under their proposal, California and North Dakota would each get $36 million to work with. That $36 million is not a great deal of stimulus for when you get down to that level.
Yeah, and just to balance a little bit, I do agree that we need new ideas, and I actually hope that NTIA and RUS will be very creative about this. And it is going to be challenging to find the right balance, and I think that one of the things, though, that we haven't mentioned here is partnerships. And I think that, if you're talking about a application that has a number of these different elements to it, so that there's the underlying build-out and an outreach and a digital uptake component all bundled in one application so that you have a solid team, somebody who can receive a decent amount of money, and also new ideas that are really going to stimulate thinking about broadband. That, to me, would be the ideal project.
Bill Schreier is the CTO of the City of Seattle. Bill, is the city thinking about the applying for some of this broadband stimulus money?
No.
Really?
No, I'm kidding, of course. Yes. And of course, there are many people who would think that Seattle doesn't meet even underserved, much less unserved. Although I was down at the FCC this morning, so I missed the morning sessions, and I told them that both underserved and unserved is any place in the United States which does not have fiber to the premise. That's my definition. Here's what we're planning. We have a municipal electric utility, and we're actually going to put in a combination of smart grid, broadband, fiber backbone, maybe a demonstration project, fiber to the premise. And just today, we modified that a little bit. The Seattle City Light, the electric utility, has 3 dams in the mountains and rural areas of Washington State. We're also thinking about actually maybe pairing with a county, a rural county that is clearly unserved, and bringing fiber or fiber to the premise or some sort of broadband to that rural county where that dam is at as well. And so it kind of seconds all the things that you've been saying about making these things, these stimulus proposals, very broad and inclusive and getting all the right partners together.
Leslie Nolte went down to RUS this morning to talk to them. Learn anything good?
They haven't made up their minds about anything. Stay tuned for June 10th. Wait for the NOFA. That's what they told us. And that's what
means?
notice of funds available.
Okay.
However, I would like to comment on what I think was perhaps a little quick statement by Joanne that we have to take exception to. There are startups that can offer very solid business plans. We're one of them. I don't think the agencies are going to rule out startups, particularly when they're trying to address a demonstrably, even by official definition, unserved area.
I apologize for that comment because I really didn't intend it that way, and I was called on it immediately and should have made my apology louder. I didn't mean that a startup can't write a business plan or anything like that. I think that I think to be fundable, we will maximize our chances of being funded if we can show capabilities and past performance and experience. You can, even if the project is a startup, the leads for your project have a track record that is demonstrable. What I think is probably going to be very hard realistically to fund, and this doesn't have to be my opinion, I think this is just common sense, is something that comes from out of thin air, either a technology or a model. That I think is going to be tough. I didn't mean to make the point about startups across the board, and I apologize for the way I said it.
Or if my phone is any indication, these funds are attracting countless charlatans or startups who don't know anything about the field, who are looking for partners to put in proposals with them, and who's to know exactly where you cut that off? And presumably every unserved area will have a startup project. So these are terms that are like everything else up in the air.
And Tom, surely if they ask ValleyNet, which is Leslie's organization, for their previous 5 years financials, and they go, no, we're a startup, will that count against them?
You know, like, again, you're asking for a lot of money. You're asking $5 million, $10 million of money. If you're giving out that money, and RUS has experience giving out that money, they'll want to be sure it's going to be used for what it's intended. Okay, the waste, fraud, and abuse. There are so many entities in the government now designated to monitor this that the agencies are going to be real careful about it. And along those lines, and it goes to something Jim talked about what Nayrook said about states. And Sharon started this way as well. The NTIA, the RUS are the ultimate decision makers here. At the end of the day, they're the ones getting hauled up in front of Congress. And I don't see them doing block grants out to states. States will come in, and if they put together projects, and they're very good states, who can do this, that are meritorious, they should get the money. But NTIA, I think, is going to be real careful how that money goes out the door.
Thank you. Anybody else here work for a city or a state that is interested in applying for, yes, Mary Beth Henry from the city of Portland.
Portland, Oregon. We reviewed the legislation, and we are putting together a project, and it really speaks to what Jim was talking about. Incredible array of stakeholders. We have an incredible telehealth application that's already in existence, but we'd like to expand it, that allows elderly to stay in their home. They do remote monitoring, and it's really quite successful right now, funded by NIH and Intel. They want to do a major expansion to low income. The neighborhood that we've picked, we want to do a pilot fiber to the home in a economically and racially diverse neighborhood, has a lot of small businesses, has one of the lower performing schools in the area, has a great community college. We have a public safety application where they can do real-time reporting and get real-time information on what's happening with the police in their neighborhood. economic development. We have e-business. We want to help on the demand side, help small businesses understand how they can use high bandwidth to grow their businesses. We have another component, Education for All, that's going to tie in the families with their schools and use streaming video and some other neat applications. Allow parents to be able to participate in PTA meetings without having to leave their homes. So there's a lot of neat things happening, and we're combining both the physical infrastructure people with the demand side people in terms of what the applications are going to be. So we're very excited, and I know that it isn't very much money. It is a lot of money, but it isn't a lot of money. That's really the truth. It's both. But we think that even if we don't get funded, there will be some real value in having brought this diverse group of stakeholders together, and who knows, maybe there will be additional funds available if we do a great job in spending the money. Thanks.
Okay, one quick point that I think is salient.
Yeah, Rafael DeGennaro. I used to run a national taxpayer organization, and I would just offer some advice from the water project world. Few things in Congress have been more wasteful over the years than dams and water projects, and the reformers got in the 80s a requirement that the locals had to match the government money. And I would urge you to generally embrace the match rather than fight it, because I think it will weed out a lot of the unserious and unready people. And the other thing is, in the water project world, it was allowed to be an in-kind match, and the reformers have been pushing that it needs to be cash. And again, I would urge you to embrace the tougher match, because it just has a good way of making the unserious people go away.
Okay, closing comments. Yes, brief, please. We can go right down the row.
Okay, extremely brief. I've been trying to keep a half eye on some of the comments here, and one of the questions was about the public interest. What should be in the public interest? When should a private firm? I just want to say Massachusetts submitted some comments to the NTIA, so somewhere on that NTIA said ours should be there too. And we did address that question. I'm trying to remember all three of the points right now, but basically they were, if they're proposing to serve an area that has no service, if they're proposing to bring better service than what is already there, or if they're working in partnership with a public entity at any level of government. Those were our criteria that we suggested.
I'll give back my time.
I'll just say that I'm pretty much an optimistic person, but these times are just off the charts for me. You know, the mood in the country is challenging, but because of that, all sorts of innovation and creativity are going on now, and I can't wait for next year to talk about how this year turned out.
The one thing we didn't talk about that I wish we had was the transparency and accountability mechanisms that are built into all of this. And I do think that that is an enormously powerful tool to make sure that this stuff gets spent properly. I really hope that NTIA and the rest make it very clear that they're damn serious about you have to be able to show where every dollar went, and if you don't, not only do we demand back what you haven't spent, but we're going to make you pay back what you already took from us.
I'll agree with that, and I would say that it was really great to hear from Mary Beth for Portland and Bill for Seattle, because I think those are examples, the creativity and the sort of vision grounded in good technology are really good examples of what I meant by projects that point the way to a different kind of communications future. So I hope there will be room for projects like that to be funded.
Okay, so thank you very much for a great panel. I'm sure it's just the beginning of the stimulus discussion, but a round of applause. Pleasure was mine. This sort of brings to a conclusion the fifth or sixth annual edition of Freedom to Connect.